Hello guys, welcome to yet another Linux tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be taking you on redirection commands. Now, in Linux, we have what we call shell redirection commands. Now, what does that mean? It means that a Linux redirection commands refers to the ability of the operating system that allows us to change the standard inputs and the standard outputs when executing command on the terminal. Now, what this simply says that whenever we are writing or executing command on the terminal, instead of our standard output to be our screen, we change it to something else. And also our standard input to be our keyboard, we change it to something else. So that is what this shell redirection means. In shell redirection, we have types of redirections. One, we have the output redirection, the input redirection, and the here documents. In this video, I'm going to cover only the output and input redirections. What is an output redirection? An output redirection is the output from a command normally intended for standard output can be easily diverted to a file instead. This capability is known as output redirection. Now, what this tells us is that when we type a command on the terminal, now instead of this command to show the output of its results on our monitor, rather we redirect it to show on a file. Okay, that means we have redirected the standard output to be our test file, so we don't see the result of the command that we type, but rather the result of the command that we type is stored inside a file. So we have redirected the standard output into a file instead. That is the output redirection. Now, the input redirection is an input from a command normally intended for standard input but can easily diverted from a file instead. Now, this capability is known as input redirection. Instead of us to type something on our keyboard, rather we now use a file that has some content inside of it. We now copy whatever that is inside of this file and give to our program. So in exchange of us typing on our keyboard, a file is supplying what we're supposed to have typed on our keyboard. So we have redirected our standard input, which is our keyboard, to be a file instead. Now let's go and write some shell commands that actually explains what we have just seen or what we have just read. Let's open our Ubuntu operating system or any Linux distros that you have. I will be using the inbuilt functionality of Windows that enables us to run a Linux operating system, which mine is Ubuntu. This is my Ubuntu. So I will be taking you on the output redirection. Now, remember what I said about the output redirection. The output redirection redirects the results of our command, like the output of our command, from our screen to a test file. So we are not going to see anything on the screen, but what we should have seen on the screen has been or will be redirected to a test file. For instance, if we do something like ls, okay, I haven't created anything yet on my, so let me touch a file, output, let me touch a file called learning. Okay, so whoa, what happened? Okay, I misspelled touch. Okay, so ls. Now what this does is, instead of these results of this ls to show on the screen, it will be redirected into a file. It's not going to be shown on the screen again, but rather it's going to be redirected into a file. For example, let's do ls. Now the operator or the command used for this redirection to a file is called the greater than sign. This sign, this is the command that does the whole thing. This for greater than sign is the command that allows us to redirect our output to a file. Now we do ls, then this command, then the name of the file, output.txt. So basically what this does is that you see this output here that we did with only ls, it will be inserted into this output.txt. So we don't see it again, but rather it will be inside of this output.txt. Now remember that we haven't created this output.txt. Assuming we have created it, you could have seen it here, okay, but it's nowhere to be found. So as we run this code, this output.txt is going to be created, and the content of this ls, which is learning, is going to be inserted instead of it to show on the screen. So enough of too much talk, let's run this code. So you can see nothing was displayed on the screen, but actually something has happened behind. Now let us ls again. Now you can see the output.txt. Now let us cut this, let us see what is inside of this output.txt. There we cut output.txt. Then you can see the learning. Now this code here redirected our standard output system, which is the monitor. It redirected it with this greater than sign to be the output.txt. So this output.txt now is our second monitor. So the standard monitor, which is the standard output, is the monitor, that is this screen that you are seeing right now. But this command here right now changed that. It redirected it to a test file. So this test file becomes our second monitor. So you can see the contents of this test file, which is learning. So it copies this file inside of itself instead of it to show us what it is on the screen. So that is what the output redirection means. Instead of it to show us on the screen, rather inserted it into a test file. So if you want to see it, you go into the test file to see what's supposed to be seen on the screen. So guys, that is one example of a standard output redirection. To explain this more further, I've created some directories which are A, B, F, TR and TREG. So I want to redirect all these files and folders here to display itself inside of a file instead of on the screen. Okay, so I want it to display itself inside of a file. I want to redirect the display from the monitor to a file. So what we have to do is ls, then the greater than sign, then we now put std.txt. Now this is the file that is going to be redirected this content, all these things into. So all these things here that are supposed to show on the screen will be shown inside here. So we have redirected the standard output to be our txt file. Now let's run this code. Now let us cut the sdt file. You can see the whole thing that's supposed to have shown on the monitor for us. You can see it is inside of this std file. So that is how to redirect outputs. Next is going to be how to redirect inputs. As I rightfully said, that the input redirection redirects our standard input, which is our keyboard, to a test file. So instead of our keyboard to provide inputs, our test file is going to provide inputs to our program. Now let us look at this example. Now I'm going to touch a file that is going to be called file.txt. I've touched this file, so this is the file here. Now this file, I'm going to echo hello world, just like this. I'm not going to put it into any file. Now you can see that it's echoed here. Okay, now let me now override, or let me redirect this from the standard output to a test file. For us to do that, after we have typed our hello world, we put our greater than sign. This overrides the standard output. So where are we putting this? We are putting it inside of this txt file that we just created, file.txt. Then we now run it. Now let's cut this file. We are cutting the file.txt. You can see the hello world. Now instead of it to print out the way it's printed here on the screen, we now redirected it to a file, which if we print the file, the same hello world will come in. So we have redirected our standard output to be the txt file. Now proceeding down, let's talk about the standard inputs. Now let us get the length of this our file.txt. So now you can see the size or the row that we inserted is just one, which is just this hello world. It occupies one row on this file txt. Okay, so it has one row and it returned the file name. It's actually taking inputs from a file. That is why it shows here. So but when you now do something like this, wc, then this less than sign, the less than sign is a symbol or a command used to override standard inputs. So the greater than sign is used to override standard outputs, while less than sign is used to override standard inputs. Then after the less than sign, you now put the name of the file, which is txt. What this actually means is that you are pretending that you are feeding in with your keyboard, but rather it is you are using a file to feed in some tests. Now let's run this code again. Let's run this code. Now you can see that it's only printed out one, but you are still using your file to supply the content hello world to this command that allows you to get the number of rows in the file. Now we did not use this operator that overrides standard inputs here. That is why it knows that we are actually using a file to supply the inputs. But here it doesn't know that we are using the same file that we used up here. Why? Because of this, it overrides the standard input, which is the keyboard. So it thinks that we are still using, or we used keyboard to supply the content of inside this file.txt to this command. That is why it did not print this file.txt. Before I forget, in Linux, whenever you run a program, it produces three standard files. One is the standard input, two is the standard output, and three is the standard error. So whenever you run a program, it produces these three files. We have talked about the standard inputs, we have talked about the standard outputs. Then we are now going to talk about the standard error to redirect the standard error into a file. Now, for example, if I want to type something like uname, this is a correct command in Linux. But what if I made a mistake and I added D and click? You can see the error that it gave me. Okay, that the command is not found. Do you mean? And it now gave me a suggestion. Now you can see this is an error message, okay, that has been prompted me with. Now for us to redirect this error message, for it not to be displayed to the screen, we can redirect it to a file, only the error messages. Now how can we do this? Let's retype this, the wrong command. Then we now put 2 in front. 2 only means error messages has 2. Then we now put the forward, the greater than sign, then the name of the file, which is error.txt, which we haven't created. We are creating it right now. Okay, so what this does is that it copies all these things and put it inside of this file. Okay, so let's run and see. Now you can see the error, this error message was not displayed. Now let's cut into this our file so that we can see actually what is happening. Now you can see that our file contains the same error message that is here. Now remember, the syntax is the error command 2. This 2 signifies error messages, just for error messages, nothing else. Okay, so don't use it for any other thing if it's not to redirect error messages. Now remember, the greater than sign is used for redirecting outputs into a file, and this is the file. So instead of it to print on the screen, is going into a file. Then when we now cut the file, we now see the contents of what is supposed to have printed on the screen for us.